Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. It has been a while since I've had this guy on. He was a very, very busy musician and author and family man and all the sports host and radio host and all that good stuff. I so enjoyed his book. Everybody that knows me knows what a fan of the Black Crowes I am. We welcome back on the man, the myth, the legend, best-selling author, Steve Gorman of Maryland in Severna Park. I always like to point that out, so you can feel free to give a shout-out to the family here, Gorman.
I'm always happy to give a shout-out. I still have family up in Lutherville, if we're specifying. So, I'm up there a few times a year. Always good to be around in the Baltimore area.
I would say there is never a week in my life where I don't drive through Lutherville for something or another and going up and down York Road in 83. All right, so, man, the book's out. You're doing – tell me what you're up to, because the first things first, there is a thing called the Black Crowes touring. There were brothers last week that got together and strummed guitars. You're not in that gig anymore, obviously, and the book has been just, I think, something sensational for you and lots of friends of mine who would have come up to you and said, hey, Steve, what happened with the band? Well, I wrote a book about it, right? So, and I really enjoyed the book. I mean, you and Hayden, just top notch, man.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. It's been interesting. It's been 2 years really since I committed to writing it. A little over 2 years. So, and a year, well over a year since I finished the book itself. So yeah, it feels like something in my head. It's in the rear view. I mean, I'm still promoting the book and will continue to do so. I've got an event tonight up in Bowling Green, Kentucky, in fact, and I'm doing a lot of book stops and book events. But yeah, it's a different world for sure.
Is there a point where you're worn out on it, because probably living it kind of sucked, talking about it the last 10 years probably really sucked? I know every time you and I would get together on the air, wherever, it would be more like, I'm going to write a book about it one day. Now that you've written the book, all you've had to do is talk about it for 6 months, but the book was very compelling in how you put it together and the psychology of it. But I would think at some point you're done talking about being, in a dysfunctional band for much of your life, right?
Well, there's a big difference between talking about my life in the Black Crowes and talking about the book I wrote about it, and it's important that I remind myself of that.
Fair enough.
I am, and those are two very different things. The book is a slice of 27 years of my life. I wrote the book is 350 pages. I wrote over 900, and the whole time I was writing it, all I thought was, "Gosh, I'm leaving so much out." So it is a very small sample size of the reality that I think does explain the story. It's a full account of what it was like to be in that band without having to go through every single day. So it's definitely, I know what you're saying. Sometimes it's like I have to remind myself, wait, I'm not talking about the band. I'm talking about a book about the band. So
well, I think you stood in judgment of yourself and all of it. I mean, it felt very therapeutic to some degree to sort of get it out. It allowed me to never have to ask you the next time I see you, hey, what happened with the Jimmy Page thing? You know what I mean? Like, the story's there and everything you want people to know. And I feel like you were pretty transparent with much of it. I mean, I don't feel like you held a whole lot back about your feelings about it, which is why we're talking about it. It's why it was compelling, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, there's no point in writing a book if it's not going to be honest. I mean, like when I say I didn't tell the whole story, it's just because there's no reason to. It doesn't serve the point. The story of the band to me is a story about people, and people are who they are. They establish who they are. They live their lives based on that. And I think that was I say this in hindsight. I didn't sit down with these linear thoughts about what the reasoning was. Simply put, I just wanted my story to be told. I thought it was a fascinating story. And even when it was happening, even at times in the 90s and in the 2000s when it was very difficult to be in that band, I could still step back and go, man, this is still pretty fascinating. Like, and I maintained, at times I was able to get separation and look at it from an outsider's view, just as a means of trying to make it somewhat logical and reasonable, at least understand what was happening, but also as a means of self-preservation. You need that perspective when things are incredibly intense and dark, sometimes you got to pull away from it and go, hang on, what's really happening here? So I was doing that a lot in real time. And I never lost sight of the fact that when you and many people would say, you got to write a book one day, I'd say, yeah, I'm going to, but nobody will believe it if I do. I always understood that it was a pretty crazy story.
Well, does every rock band have a crazy story as you see it or know it? Like every band you ever opened for, or they opened for you, or every backstage club, all those guys met somewhere. I literally was in New York for the very first time last week and looked up and saw the building that says Village Voice on it. And I'm like, I said to my wife, how many bands met that way, right? And all of it is a little not normal, right? And I often say this about like football players. Like going out with a helmet and trying to tear, that's not normal. That's not the way most of us live our lives, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, most rock bands are, if not every member of the band, any band has at least one guy in it who grew up kind of by himself and his instrument was his best friend. I mean, those are the people that decide to commit to a life, I'll do anything to do this. And so you're inherently dealing with some social miscreants, if you will, some people who aren't so much people, but every band is a
well, they're not fully evolved people, is what you would say, right? And none of us are at 19, right? Like literally, right?
Well, to varying degrees. You've got everybody. I mean, to me, like this book is about people. The context is a rock and roll band, but it's a story about it's me realizing, wait, the only thing I've ever wanted to do, I'm not doing it yet, so I have to just leave my life and go find a band somewhere, and then meeting people who are similarly possessed with that notion, and what we're willing to do to get it, what we're willing to do to maintain it, and how willing we are to kid ourselves that we're losing it. I mean, and there's a lot of that anybody in any endeavor can relate to, and especially, when you factor in the main pillars of addiction and codependency, that's relatable to just about everybody that I know. I mean, if it's a family member or a coworker, everybody's dealt with addiction either directly or peripherally. And if you deal with addiction, then you certainly have some understanding of what codependency is, whether you really can put it in linear terms or not. These are all familiar responses and familiar ways of life and familiar situations that the band found themselves in.
Steve Gorman is our guest. He's written a wonderful book. If you love rock and roll, you love the Black Crowes. I enjoyed it. I read it going to Hawaii for the very first time and in Hawaii, and I read it on the way back. And it was a great sort of vacation beach kind of book for me, an airplane kind of book. But knowing your background and having interviewed you guys on your very first tour, opening for Junkyard and Hammerjacks, and I actually have the evidence. By the way, dude, I'm going to hold this up on the video, and I don't know if you own this or remember this at all. I have literally a little mini Bible that, as a music critic, your band PR people sent me for the Southern Harmony Musical Companion that is literally a lyric book that looks like a hymnal. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but I found this going through my rock and roll archives, and it's kind of one of the cooler little... no offense if Led Zeppelin had sent me The Object from Presence, but this is the next best thing, bro.
Yeah, no, there's only a few hundred of those out there, so it's not. I mean, probably a couple times a year, maybe once a year, somebody will show me one of those and ask me to sign it. Those were. I remember very clearly when putting all the Southern Harmony promo stuff together and thinking those were cool. I probably had a dozen of those myself, but I have no idea where they are.
Well, I'll tell you what, for me, I have so many questions to ask, but the passing of Neil Peart and you being a drummer and the drum community coming together in a way, and literally that was the day before the Ravens lost to the Titans. I was on a plane. I found myself listening to By Tour and Red Barchetta and Vital Signs and really reading the words, and I thought, like, people think of him as a drummer, and a drummer would think of him as a drummer, but I sort of think of him as a lyricist because I'm not a drummer, right? And you sort of skirted over in your book, and I went back through my notes because I was taking these notes at 35,000 feet somewhere over the Pacific on the way back as to what I was going to ask you. But learning to play the drums, and learning your instrument, that was something I don't feel like you really went into the pain of all of that and not really knowing how to play all that well, self-admittedly, when you found these scraggly-haired rock guys from the suburbs in Atlanta, right?
Yeah, well, I never viewed it as a painful process. I mean, I really, my strengths and weaknesses were apparent. I knew what they both were, so I didn't struggle with that. I spent my life obsessed with drums and drumming and dreaming of being a drummer in a band and thinking about, well, when that happens, what will I do? And in a
Since
weird
when?
way,
Since you were like 8 or no?
No, like 6.
Wow. Okay.
And so I truly did a lot of the homework ahead of time. And then, so, I started late. I didn't own a drum kit until I was 21. But at the same time, I also missed an awful lot of painful years. Most drummers, teenage drummers, tend to sit in their basement and try to be Neil Peart, or they try to be Keith Moon. And that doesn't work. And it definitely doesn't work when you then add a bass player and a guitar player to the room, and they look at you and go, "What are you doing, dude?" It's like, stop with all that crazy playing. So, a big part of when I first moved to Atlanta, the band that I moved there to start was called Marry My Hope, and it was a very ambitious band musically, and we connected well and played well. But the truth is, where they were trying to get to was beyond my abilities at that time, and I knew that. Mr. Crow's Garden wasn't. Mr. Crow's Garden was 4 and 5 chord songs, verse, chorus, bad solo, chorus, out. Simple arrangements, straight beat, not a lot of fills required, and it made a way more sense for me. So when I decided to switch bands and I joined Mr. Crow's Garden, Rich Robinson and I were both learning how to play our instruments, and we learned together, like playing together. So we developed a feel and an ability to do something that was unique and that only we can do. It can't be replicated very specifically by anybody else. And I recognized all that as it was happening. I never said I was the best drummer in the world, but I'm certainly the best drummer in the world for the Black Crowes. I mean, that was my band. It was my feel. I was a huge part of everything that band did musically because that's all we did. And so it's a matter of, circumstance. Obviously, I had natural talent. I knew the first time I sat behind a drum kit ever, I was in high school, and I just started playing it. I didn't have to say, now, which hand goes where. I knew exactly. I'd spent years imagining that moment, and I just started to play the drums. And I put on headphones, and I played along to Kashmir. It's the first thing I ever did with a drum set.
Wow.
And I didn't play it perfectly, but I could play it. I didn't have any stamina. I didn't know how hard or soft to hit necessarily, but I had thought about those things. I'd literally been watching and thinking about drumming and drummers my entire life. So it was a bit of a, it wasn't a fish jumping into water, but it was pretty darn close. So I knew enough after playing a handful of times in college that if I put any effort into this at all, I'd be really good at it. So, being honest about the fact that I wasn't very good, it doesn't mean that I didn't have all the potential and talent. It just means I hadn't done it yet.
Several things in your book blew my mind, Steve Gorman, but the point, the Black Crowes and Jimmy Page, that whole section, I thought you guys toured for a year or two. I thought, in my mind, it was 20 years ago. I saw you guys on a rainy night in Chicago at the Shed, way the hell out in Southwest Chicago. And you guys only played a handful of shows, really, right?
Yeah, we did 6 shows in the fall of '99, and then we did 11 shows in the summer of 2000. The show in Chicago that you saw, that was the first show of that tour. We did the 6th the fall of '99, and we thought that was it.
Dude, I had a great seat, man. I was in the pit. I was about 4 rows back on the right side. I mean, I have a vivid memory of that night because it was sort of insane to see Chris strutting around singing Custard Pie. It was wild, man,
Yeah, well, I had a better seat. And so, but, we did the 6 shows in the fall, and then we got a live album out of that. But we thought that was it. When we put those 6 shows up, there was no thought whatsoever of what happens after this. It was just going to be those 6. And very happily for everyone involved, we had a blast, and it was like, hey, let's keep doing this. So the next summer when we went out, and we rehearsed in Chicago for about 5 days at a place called the Congress Theater, and then that show you saw, that was the first one of what was supposed to be 55 shows.
Yeah, and the story, when the story happened that Page left, I closed the book, I turned to my wife and I said, this thing, I mean, it was really a roller coaster ride. I really want to give credit to Hayden. I mean, I'm a writer. I've written 4 books. I would love to be a guy that would sit down with a guy like you and write a book and try to piece it together because I like doing that sort of thing from a structural basis. Give me the relationship between you and Hayden, because to trust someone and bring someone in and have it turn out so well, it was just such a well-done book, man.
Well, thank you. The way this worked, Hayden was part of, we did the setup together. We structured out the narrative, the way we worked, and we didn't know what we were going to do. I got the deal, and then I said, hey, I've never written a book. Do you want to help me with this? I can write, and I've been writing my whole life, but I'm just going to need a little help somewhere, but I don't even know where. And then as we discussed it, what I realized was I've got this giant story to tell. Where do I start? How do I even get in? So what the most important thing Stephen did was, all at the beginning, we sat down together and we recorded me telling the story for dozens of hours. And then he got all that transcribed. So we had my spoken word version of everything that happened on paper, and we went through there and framed out the chapters. Well, let's start right here. Chapter 1 should be this, and let's go to here. Chapter 2, we broke it out into chapters with just bullet points explaining where we're gonna start and where we're gonna get to. And then, having done that, he basically said, okay, there's a prologue, there's an epilogue, and then here's 40 chapters that we agreed upon the framework of. But then I went and wrote it. Like, I said, see you later, I'll let you know when I'm done. And basically spent about 8 months writing this 900-page version of the book. And what you read is, basically it's this. I turned in this giant tome knowing it was way longer than the publisher expected or wanted, or really, frankly, that anybody needed. No one needs 900 pages on the Black Rose. But the thing that Stephen then did on the back end was, as I was writing and sending chapters, he was aware of, he kept the narrative in play, the broadest sense of the narrative of the story. And so he was already thinking the whole time, as I would send him finished chapters, he would realize, basically he said this, look, you got to give the reader a little more credit. You're telling great stories, but you've already established this part of the narrative. Like, this doesn't advance the story. It just, it says the same story again. It's different names, different dates, different context, but it's the same basic gist. And so give the reader credit. They know who everybody is by now. It's real overview things like that. The editing process, when I submitted it, I couldn't begin to say, okay, let's go chop this thing down. It was still too close. So, we had 900 pages, and then he immediately took a third of it out. He just said, take this out, thin this out, and then we started framing it down from there. But as far as the flow of the book, and this is not he was great. My line for Hayden has been, I could have done it without him. It just would have taken 7 years, And, he made the process much more expedient. I wrote the songs, but he produced it, is the easiest way to say it. And gave me just good tips on what I couldn't approach it from the reader's perspective. He was great about saying why this story is better. Like, here's 5 stories. They're all kind of the same. And he was the guy who would say, this one has a little bit more to do with the overall arc than these 3. So just go with that one. And I did trust I did trust him in that regard.
The other person was Pete Angelos, and we talk a lot about Peter Angelos here, and I know you have a relationship with the Angelos family and come up, and your brother, and going to Orioles games and all that, but the name is unique. But having a human being that believes in you, a campaign manager, someone who's willing to put his nuts on the line with you crazy musicians, you artists, and the drugs and all of that, I found that to be the most enduring, fascinating part of it, because I've managed people. I started my own band at WNST 20 years ago and managed crazy sports radio show host as well. And they went and started another band elsewhere, and you can go see that band if you wish. So I feel a little bit of that when I would say, the Black Crowes are going out and touring this summer, and it's not you. And I have a hard time with that, but I'm a loyalty guy, right? And it feels to me like lost in all of this is this really special dude who put you guys over and over and over again, and wanted you to be the Rolling Stones and bet his life on you to some degree.
Well, without question. I mean, it's not at all hyperbole or a stretch to say if we hadn't met Pete Angelis, nobody who will be listening to this interview would have ever heard of the Black Crowes. That's just a fact in my mind. And if you had heard of the Black Crowes, it would have been this band that showed up for a minute and then was gone. I mean, Pete not only opened every door, it was really this simple. He said, guys, you go play the shows. I'm going to build a plan. If you do what I say, we're going to get somewhere. And for 2 albums, we did just that. And within 2 album cycles, we were headlining major festivals all around the world and selling hundreds of thousands of tickets a year, and millions of albums. And then as soon as Chris decided he no longer wanted to be managed, but instead thought every business decision was also, in fact, an artistic and creative decision, then it was basically the game was over. It was just a matter of how long are the rest of us going to continue to play out the garbage time and still making good music, but as a living, breathing team that was moving somewhere together. We only had 4 years of that. So that, and the rest was spent just patching holes and trying to stay afloat. That's really what that's where the energies all went to. Pete's a brilliant man. I mean, a creative genius, a business genius, and we could not have possibly had a better person show up at the last minute and say, "Oh, I think I see what to do with you guys. Let's do this." And it's to his eternal credit that we had anything in terms of not just commercial success, but any length of time for a career. I knew after the 3rd album that if Pete had ever left, then there's no way the band would have stayed together. If we had, it's not unlike in the simple. People often forget, is when Brian Epstein died, every member of the Beatles will tell you that's when it ended. The summer of '67. It was over. They might have still made some great music, and they certainly did, but the idea of what the band had once been and what it was possible and what it was capable of staying, it ended the minute their manager died. And if Pete Angelis had ever left the Black Crowes, I assure you it would have been a matter of weeks before the band was gone, off the radar forever.
Steve Gorman is our guest. The book has been out almost 6 months now. He's still out doing Hard to Handle, The Life and Death of the Black Crowes, a memoir. He wrote it with Stephen Hyden. I would highly recommend you pick it up if you love rock and roll stories or bands or stories about bands or, hey, I love that band, what happened to them. Dude, I read it, I put it down, and, the brothers are out strumming a guitar, and they're doing a tour, and they have the name, and you don't have the name, and you're doing Trigger Hippie, and I mean, reading the book, it soured me on going out and seeing them play this summer. I wish it weren't that way, but I'm sure I'm not the only one that has said that to you. I don't know that was your primary intention or intention at all, but it is kind of a gruesome story of managing relationships and sort of psychology of what constitutes a full human being, I would say.
Well, sure. I mean, no, it was not my intent at all. The last thing on my mind is how this is going to impact either Robinson brother. That wouldn't be an honest. It's my story. They're characters in my story, and if they want to write a book, I'll be the character in their story. That's literally how I approached it. If people want to go see the Black Crowes, that's the tour that you referenced. They're on the road right now. Hell, they're in Nashville tonight. They're playing here tonight. It's got nothing to do with me. It literally has no bearing on not only me, but it has no bearing on anything the Black Crowes have ever been in the past, by design. And that's just where they are. They don't have other options. It was never a surprise to me. I knew they were going to do this tour a long time ago. I knew they were going to do this tour well before the book was released. It's as inevitable as the sun coming up in the east. So, but it's also got nothing to do with what the Black Crowes ever were. And there's another thing too about the Black Crowes. There was a band for a while there in the 90s that was a very unique and special, top shelf, all-time great rock and roll band. And then after 1997, there was a group that continued as the Black Crowes, but it was never the same. The essence of what made that band so special from 91 to 97 was gone and it would never return, despite our, we had a minute there in 2005 where I think we were on our way back. But then it unraveled again, and it was never returned, and it was always, it was just, a band, any band that stays around, you have to evolve and grow and change. And the Black Crowes certainly evolved, but not in positive ways. It devolved in a lot of ways. What made the band special to me was never a concern for the Robinson brothers. They've always seen the band as, despite whatever they said over the years, it was always about them. It's just us. We did it. Well, they started Mr. Crow's Garden when they were 15 and 17. But if you think that the Black Crowes in 1992 are the same band you started in 1985, that's juvenile thinking. It's absurd. And it also it's very dismissive of the efforts and contributions and talents and ambitions of a whole lot of people. And so now they're back to where they began, and they think that's how it always was. And that's their worldview. And I find that to be completely bizarre, and I don't even have the words to describe that, but that's what's going on here.
Well, for me, like, to quote a song or to throw a lyric at you from any number of it's almost, is there something you want to walk away from in that way where they're out singing songs that you were a part of, you're not, right? For the most part, and probably never will, right? I mean, you've played Good Friday for the last time, probably, sort of, kind of?
I would certainly imagine that to be the case. I can't imagine a scenario where I would, but, I knew in 2014 when Chris demanded all the money from the band moving forward, I knew that was it was very simple to go, oh, this is done. This is 100% in my rearview mirror. And that's, we're talking about something that happened 6 years ago. So it's again, I'm talking about a book that's new, but I'm not talking about a band or my life in that band. It's, in terms of the book and telling the story, that's recent, but all of this stuff is ancient history to me otherwise.
He is Steve Gorman. The book is out. So you're doing, let's see, you got a talk show now. You're out doing the book. Trigger Hippie's playing a bunch of shows in your homeland in Appalachian, Tennessee, the Ohio Valley and all that stuff. Love to get you back to the East Coast. I know you got some Orioles Jones in you, although they're going to lose 100 this year. I'm sure you're aware. But give me a little worldview where you are, other than, hey, I wrote this book a year ago and I'm still talking about this band I was in for 30 years. But I guess you only think about it when guys like me bring it up, right?
Well, sure. Yeah, no, I have a very, Trigger Hippie is a full-time band. I have a radio show with Westwood One Network called Steve Gorman Rocks. That's 5 nights a week, a classic rock show. And I, as you referenced at first, I have a family. I've got, I don't have enough time in the day. So, I'm still doing, but like I said, I'm still doing book promotion, but I've got other projects down the road. I've got various things. I spent a lot of time in that band not doing anything but being in the Black Crowes. And it's real easy with hindsight to look back and go, man, I spent 15 years just with a million ideas I didn't have time to, or I didn't have the inspiration to pursue. So I'm doing all those things now. It's fantastic. And it's not kicking, I love the Black Crowes. I love the music we made. I'm always proud of what we accomplished. It's a sad story, but it's also, I'm full of gratitude for it. That's not an issue. That said, the last 6 years have been the best 6 years of my life. That's the ultimate thing to me is that I got out and feel great about everything. So, it's all good. It's all good from my perspective, and it's very busy and it's very satisfying.
Well, your show, you talk about music and life and I would think the passing of Neil Peart, one of the weird things of being in a band, there are very, very few bands that do it that way, right? Like, put a band together in high school, live your entire life in that band, never being seen on a stage for the most part in any other capacity. That is so incredibly rare, and I would think sitting around and talking about bands, for the most part, talking about the day they didn't listen to their manager, the day drugs got involved, or a girl got involved, or a record label got, or they got ripped off, or, whatever happened. Those are usually the stories of classic rock bands, right?
Yeah, and the thing about Rush, I'm not a card-carrying Rush fan by any stretch, but I always had tremendous respect for them, and the two things that we all found out together were A, Neil Peart's been sick for 3 years, and B, Neil Peart died. And they both happened after the fact. He was sick for 3 years. No one knew that. And then he died on a Tuesday, and no one found out till Friday. And those might not sound like huge things, but to me, those say everything you need to know about Rush as a band. That's it. They were respectful of each other. They were their own world. They had the dignity and the understanding to keep his secret a secret. And in fact, they held out. I mean, how is it possible in 2020 or that someone was gone for 3 days? Someone of Neil Peart's stature was gone for 3 days and the world didn't know. That just tells me that those guys had the utmost respect, not just for him as an individual, but for what that band was, what they accomplished together. You know, they came off the road, 5 years ago because he was tired of touring. And it didn't occur to them to go try to replace him. It didn't occur to them to go out and do two-man shows without a drummer. Whatever they did it seemingly together and with respect for, again, not only each other personally, but what they were as a band. And that's what's really rare. You know, a band like U2, a band like REM, those bands all have huge issues behind the scenes. It doesn't, but they keep them behind the scenes. They respect the whole more than their individual, you know, moment-to-moment needs or desires or fears or weaknesses. And that's where bands go. You know, there's a line that every band hits a certain, you know, few years into their career where normally it's like, wait, it's hard to keep bands together. Like we started talking about, you know, the kind of people that get into bands are not normally the people with the most social skills or the most, you know, team-oriented people. They've all sat in their basement for years alone pretending to be rock stars, and then they get to be a rock star, and they don't know how to deal with other people. And it's all about people management. It's all about values, establishing what you want, you know, staying on the same page. It's not at all unlike a basketball team. You know, you got to have 5 guys. All 5 guys contribute to the success. It only takes one guy to ruin it for everybody else. And every band is the exact same way.
Hey, dude, love the book. You know, love what you're doing. I want to see Trigger Hippie. Let's get out here and do some East Coast shows, see an Orioles game or whatnot. I know you've been busy and enjoying life in Nashville, but it's great to have you on. It took me a few months, but even better conversation later than it would have even been 6 months germinating on all of it. Appreciate you, Gorman. Good luck with everything you're doing out there. I'll send everybody out to follow you on Twitter, and certainly the audiobook. I did not listen to the audiobook. I'm old school, dude. I still turn pages, you know. But, you know, I know you're out doing that as well. So come back to Baltimore, sign some books, man, all right?
Right on, man. Thank you. Steve
Gorman, Hard to Handle, The Life and Death of the Black Crowes, a memoir written with Stephen Hayden. 27 years in the band, in the Black Crowes, that I love so much. I have my copy of my Southern Harmony and Musical Companion, my little Bible here with, it's really, really cool little book, man. And to know there aren't many of them, little sting me there. See, there you go. Perfect. You can find me and other rock and roll conversations and sports conversations and Baltimore positive conversations. And, of course, Steve Gorman, a native Marylander from back in the day in Severna Park as well. So little roots there and some Oriole roots as well. Now, I'm going to share that picture of me and Gorman from backstage at Hammerjacks in '89 when they were out on the original tour, the Shake Your Moneymaker tour with Junkyard. And Gorman is wearing the ornithologically correct Oriole bird of Cal Ripken in 1989 when they changed the bird hats. How about that? Why not? There you go. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook. And most of our conversations, we try to make them as good as that one was with Steve Gorman. We're back for more. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and Baltimore Positive, and we never stop telling great stories, mixing a little rock and roll memoirs as well.